The autumn sun cast long shadows across Fifth Avenue as Amira Hassan smoothed down her emerald green hijab, checking her reflection one last time in the glass storefront. At 24, she had learned to perform this ritual before entering any upscale establishment in Manhattan, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. She wanted to give them no excuse, no reason to turn her away, except the one they wouldn't say aloud. "You look perfect," whispered her best friend Sarah Chen, linking arms with her. "Stop worrying." But Amira couldn't stop worrying. Tonight was supposed to be special. After 3 years of working grueling double shifts at Mount Sinai Hospital as a cardiac nurse, saving every spare dollar, she had finally saved enough to treat her parents to dinner at Lumiere, the French restaurant that had been featured in the New York Times, Vogue, and practically every food blog in the tri-state area. The waiting list was 4 months long. She had called the day the reservations opened, stayed on hold for 45 minutes, and nearly cried with joy when they confirmed her booking for 6 people at 7:30 p.m. on Saturday, October 14th. Her parents' 25th wedding anniversary deserved something extraordinary. They had sacrificed everything, leaving their comfortable life in Alexandria, Egypt, selling her mother's jewelry, her father's medical practice, to give Amira and her younger brother Omar a chance at the American dream. And they had done it. Omar was in his second year at Columbia Law School. Amira had her nursing degree and was being considered for a supervisor position. They were living proof that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. Or so she had believed. "Reservation for Hassan, party of 6." Amira said to the hostess, a rail-thin woman with platinum blonde hair pulled back so severely it looked painful. The woman wore all black, her lips painted a deep crimson that matched the velvet curtains framing the entrance. The hostess's eyes flickered from her computer screen to Amira's face, then to her hijab, then back to the screen. The pause was almost imperceptible, but Amira felt it in her chest like a pulled thread. "Hassan?" The hostess repeated, her voice clipped. "I don't see that name in our system." Amira's stomach dropped. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling frantically through her emails until she found the confirmation. "Here. I have the confirmation number. See. October 14th, 7:30, party of 6." The hostess barely glanced at the screen. "That's not our confirmation format. This looks fake." "Fake?" Amira's voice came out higher than she intended. "I called 4 months ago. I spoke to someone named Marcus. He confirmed everything. I even called last week to verify. Well, I don't have any record of it." The hostess's tone was final, dismissive. She looked past Amira to the couple behind them, a white man in an expensive suit and his date in a cocktail dress. "Can I help you?" "Wait," Amira said, her heart pounding. "Please, just check again. It's my parents' anniversary. We came all the way from." "Ma'am, I've checked. You're not in the system. Now you're holding up the line." Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Could we speak to the manager, please?" The hostess's expression hardened. "The manager is very busy." "I'm sure he can spare 2 minutes," Sarah insisted. With an exaggerated sigh, the hostess disappeared through the curtain. Amira could feel the eyes of other waiting patrons on her, could sense their impatience, their judgment. She wanted to disappear, to run out into the October evening and never come back. But then she thought of her parents, waiting in the taxi she'd asked to circle the block because parking was impossible. She thought of her mother's excited phone call that morning, talking about the new dress she'd bought specially for tonight. She thought of her father, who had secretly been practicing his French phrases from a YouTube video. She stood her ground. When the hostess returned, she wasn't alone. A man in his 50s with silver hair and a navy suit approached with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm David Morrison, the general manager. How can I help you ladies this evening?" Amira explained again, showing him the confirmation email, the follow-up call she'd logged in her phone records. As she spoke, she watched his expression carefully. Unlike the hostess, he was better at hiding his bias, but she could see it there, in the way his gaze kept drifting to her hijab, in the slight tightness around his mouth, in the way he stood just a bit too far away, as if proximity might somehow contaminate him. "I see the confusion," he said smoothly when she finished. "This confirmation is from our old booking system. We upgraded 3 months ago. Somehow, your reservation didn't transfer over. But I called to confirm last week," Amira protested. "And who did you speak with?" I don't remember her name." but she definitely confirmed the reservation. Morrison spread his hands apologetically. I'm sorry, but without that information, there's nothing I can do. Our system is quite reliable, and if you're not in it, he trailed off meaningfully. So you're telling me that I confirmed a reservation that doesn't exist? Amira could feel angry tears prickling at her eyes. She refused to let them fall. I'm telling you that sometimes these technological transitions have hiccups. I'm truly sorry for the inconvenience. Inconvenience? The word came out sharper than she intended. This is my parents' 25th anniversary. I've been planning this for months. Morrison's expression shifted slightly, a flash of something, annoyance perhaps, crossing his features. And I sympathize. However, we're fully booked tonight. There's simply no room. Then put us on the wait list, Sarah interjected. Surely someone will cancel. The wait list is quite long, I'm afraid. You'd be better off trying another restaurant. Might I suggest? I don't want another restaurant, Amira interrupted, her voice shaking now. I want the reservation I made. I want the table I booked. I want, ma'am. Morrison's voice took on a harder edge. I've explained the situation. There's nothing more I can do. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disrupting the other guests. And there it was. The moment where inconvenience became accusation, where asking for what was rightfully hers became a disturbance. Amira looked around at the restaurant's waiting area, at the well-dressed patrons avoiding her gaze, at the hostess whose lips curled in satisfaction. You're kicking me out, Amira asked quietly. I'm asking you to leave voluntarily before I have to call security. The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah grabbed Amira's hand, squeezing hard. We're not leaving until we get what we came for, a table, or a real explanation for why our confirmed reservation suddenly doesn't exist. Morrison's jaw tightened. Then I'll call security. Call them, Sarah said defiantly. And while you're at it, maybe explain to them why the one reservation that mysteriously disappeared belonged to someone who happens to wear a hijab. Are you accusing me of discrimination? Morrison's voice was dangerous now. I'm stating facts, Sarah replied coolly. Amira made a reservation 4 months ago. She confirmed it last week. Now she's here, and suddenly it's vanished. And instead of trying to accommodate her, you're threatening to have her removed. How does that look? For a moment, Morrison seemed to waver. Then his expression hardened completely. I don't have to justify my business practices to you. You have 10 seconds to leave before I call the police. The police. The word sent ice through Amira's veins. She thought of the news stories, the viral videos, the hashtags. She thought of what could happen when police confronted a Muslim woman who was causing a disturbance. She thought of her parents in the taxi, of Omar waiting at home, of her career, her reputation, her life. Let's go, she whispered to Sarah. Amira, let's go. They walked out into the October evening, the autumn air biting against Amira's wet cheeks. She hadn't realized she'd started crying. Down the block, she could see her parents' taxi, could make out her mother's silhouette in the back seat. How was she going to explain this? The aftermath. Amira stood on the corner of 5th Avenue and 52nd Street, watching the taxi's taillights disappear into the evening traffic. Her mother's disappointed face was burned into her memory. The way her father had tried to hide his hurt behind a forced smile, suggesting they go to the halal cart on 6th Avenue instead, like the old days. But these weren't the old days. These were supposed to be the good days, the days when their sacrifices had paid off, when they could finally enjoy the fruits of their labor. Instead, Amira felt like she was back to square one, being told she didn't belong, that her money wasn't good enough, that her presence was a disruption. Hey. Sarah's hand on her shoulder brought her back to the present. You okay? It was such an absurd question that Amira almost laughed. No. I'm really not. Come on. Sarah steered her toward a coffee shop across the street. Let's sit down. Figure out what to do next. The cafe was warm and crowded, filled with the chatter of Saturday evening conversations. They found a small table in the corner, and Sarah ordered 2 cappuccinos without asking, knowing Amira's brain was too scrambled to make even simple decisions. I can't believe that just happened, Amira said, staring at her hands. They were shaking. I mean, I can believe it. I've dealt with this my whole life. But I really thought. I don't know what I thought. That a fancy reservation would somehow make me immune? That if I had enough money, dressed nicely enough, spoke perfectly enough, that it wouldn't matter? Sarah reached across the table, gripping her friend's hands. This isn't on you. You know that, right? You did everything right. They're the ones who. Who what? Discriminated against me? Can I even prove that? Amira pulled her hands back, wrapping them around the coffee cup that had appeared in front of her. Morrison was smooth. He had his excuse ready. A technological glitch. A system upgrade. How do I prove that's not what really happened? The timing is suspicious. The way he looked at you was suspicious. The way that hostess barely glanced at your confirmation before calling it fake. Suspicious isn't proof, Amira interrupted. I'm a nurse. I deal with evidence, with charts, with documentation. And all I have is a confirmation email that they can claim is from an old system. It's my word against theirs. And whose word do you think people will believe? The prestigious French restaurant that's been featured in the Times? Or the angry Muslim woman who's probably just looking for attention? Sarah was quiet for a moment, her expression troubled. So what? You're just going to let them get away with it? I don't know. Amira took a sip of her cappuccino, barely tasting it. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened. Go home, crawl into bed. Never think about Lumiere again. But another part. She paused, remembering the satisfaction on the hostess's face, the coldness in Morrison's eyes. Another part of me is so angry I can barely breathe. Good, Sarah said fiercely. Hold on to that anger. Use it. Use it how? We live in the age of social media. Tell your story. Post about what happened. Let people know what kind of establishment Lumiere really is. Amira bit her lip, considering. She'd never been much for social media beyond the occasional Instagram story of her coffee or a sunset. The idea of putting her pain out there for public consumption felt exposing, vulnerable. But Sarah had a point. In 2023, social media was often the only recourse people had against institutional discrimination. I don't know, she said finally. What if it backfires? What if people don't believe me? What if it affects my job? What if it helps someone else? Sarah counted. What if there's another girl like you saving up for months to take her family somewhere special, and she sees your story and knows to avoid Lumiere? What if speaking up prevents this from happening to someone else? The words resonated deep in Amira's chest. She thought about the countless times she'd been treated as less than, as suspicious, as unwelcome. She thought about all the times she'd swallowed her hurt and moved on because making a fuss seemed worse than enduring the injustice. She thought about Omar, about the next generation, about whether things would ever change if people like her stayed silent. Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it. They spent the next hour crafting a post, with Sarah helping Amira find the right words, honest but not inflammatory, detailed but not melodramatic. When they finished, Amira read it over one more time. Tonight was supposed to be special. After months of planning and saving, I made a reservation at Lumiere to celebrate my parents' 25th anniversary. I confirmed the reservation last week, but when we arrived, the hostess claimed my confirmation was fake and that I wasn't in their system. When I showed proof, the manager blamed it on a system upgrade and told me there was nothing he could do. When I persisted, he threatened to call the police and have me removed for disturbing other guests. I can't prove why my reservation disappeared. I can't prove why I was treated with such hostility and suspicion. But I can share my experience. I'm a cardiac nurse. I work 60-hour weeks saving lives. I pay my taxes. I follow the rules. And tonight, I wasn't allowed through the door of a restaurant I had a confirmed reservation for. This is what discrimination looks like in 2023. Not burning crosses or slurs, usually. Just a hostess who won't meet your eyes. A manager with a smooth excuse. A door that closes in your face while others walk through. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but for awareness. And maybe, somewhere, for justice. She attached a photo of her confirmation email and hit post. Nothing happened for the first hour. A few likes from friends, a couple of sympathetic comments. Amira went home, helped Omar order pizza, and tried to avoid her parents' concerned questions. She took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the humiliation of the evening, though it couldn't quite reach the hurt that had settled deep in her bones. By the time she got into bed, her phone was buzzing constantly. She picked it up, expecting the usual handful of notifications, and gasped. Her post had been shared 347 times. The comments had exploded to over 200. People were tagging Lumiere, demanding explanations. Local news accounts were asking if they could message her. Sarah called, her voice excited. Amira. It's blowing up. Someone with 500,000 followers shared it. This is going viral. Amira scrolled through the comments, her heart racing. Most were supportive, sharing their own stories of discrimination, expressing outrage, calling for boycotts. But there were others. Maybe your confirmation really was fake. Why assume racism? There are two sides to every story. I'm sure the restaurant had good reasons. Here we go again, playing the victim card. Maybe you were just rude. If you don't like it here, go back to your own country. That last one hit her like a physical blow. Your own country. She'd been born in Brooklyn. She'd never lived anywhere but New York. America was her country, her home, her birthright. But to some people, she would always be foreign, always be other, always be someone who didn't quite belong. She was about to put her phone down when a new comment appeared, this one from an account she didn't recognize. At Jessica Journalist. I'm a reporter for the New York Tribune. I'd like to speak with you about your experience. This story deserves to be told. Please DM me. Amira stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. A reporter. The New York Tribune. This was getting real, getting big, getting beyond anything she'd imagined when she made that post. Was she ready for this? Did she have a choice? Going public. Jessica Liu turned out to be exactly what Amira had pictured, sharp, professional, with a recorder and notebook that looked like they'd been through a war. They met at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from the glitz of Manhattan, where Amira felt she could breathe. Thank you for meeting with me, Jessica said, her dark eyes warm but serious. I know this must be difficult. It feels surreal, Amira admitted. Yesterday I was just a nurse trying to plan a nice dinner. Now I'm… What? A symbol. A story. You're a person who experienced discrimination and had the courage to speak up about it, Jessica corrected gently. That's important. Can you walk me through exactly what happened from the beginning? Amira told the story again, reliving each painful moment. Jessica listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her pen moving rapidly across the page. When Amira finished, the reporter sat back, her expression troubled. This isn't the first time I've heard about Lumiere, Jessica said carefully. Off the record, I've gotten tips about other incidents. Nothing as documented as yours, but patterns. A black couple told to dress more appropriately despite wearing formal attire. A Hispanic family told their reservation was under review, but nobody wanted to go public. They were afraid of retaliation, of being labeled troublemakers. Are you saying this is systematic? Amira's voice shook. I'm saying it's worth investigating. With your permission, I'd like to reach out to these other people, see if they'll talk now that someone else has spoken up. I'd also like to contact Lumiere for their official response. Amira hesitated. Once Jessica contacted the restaurant, there'd be no going back. This would become a real story, a real accusation, a real battle. What if they sue me for defamation? You've told the truth. You have documentation. That's a strong defense. But Amira, Jessica's voice softened. I need you to understand what you're getting into. Once the story runs, your life is going to change. There will be people who support you, people who attack you, people who question every aspect of your story and your character. The internet can be vicious. Are you prepared for that? Amira thought about the hateful comments already appearing on her social media, thought about the strangers who felt entitled to judge her, thought about the price of speaking truth to power. Then she thought about the next Muslim girl who might be turned away from a restaurant, the next family humiliated, the next person made to feel less than human. I'm prepared, she said. The story ran 3 days later on the Tribune's front page. Reservation while Muslim. Nurse alleges discrimination at elite Manhattan restaurant. Jessica had done her homework. She'd found 2 other families willing to speak on record about similar experiences at Lumiere. She'd uncovered that the restaurant had been cited 2 years ago for health code violations, but had used its political connections to minimize the scandal. She'd interviewed former employees who spoke anonymously about a culture of elitism and prejudice. The response was immediate and explosive. Within hours, protesters gathered outside Lumiere. The hashtag #BoycottLumiere trended on Twitter. Celebrities chimed in. Politicians released statements. The story was picked up by CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, each framing it through their own lens, each using Amira's experience to make their own political points. Amira's phone didn't stop ringing. Interview requests poured in. Supporters sent flowers and messages. Detractors sent death threats. She had to make her social media accounts private after the 15th rape threat came through. Through it all, Lumiere remained silent. For 3 days, David Morrison and the restaurant's owners refused to comment, letting their lawyers issue terse no comments to the press. The silence felt strategic, calculated, like they were waiting for the storm to pass, for the news cycle to move on to the next outrage. They miscalculated. On the fourth day, Marcus Chen came forward. The whistleblower. Marcus Chen had worked as a reservations manager at Lumiere for 6 years. He was the one who had taken Amira's original booking, had confirmed it enthusiastically, had even noted in the system that it was for an anniversary. He remembered her name because Hassan was his mother's maiden name, and he had watched, sick to his stomach, as David Morrison deliberately deleted the reservation from the new system. "I should have said something then," Marcus told Jessica Liu in a follow-up article that hit the Tribune's website like a bombshell. "But I was scared. Scared of losing my job, scared of retaliation. I have student loans, rent. I convinced myself it was a one-time thing, that maybe I misunderstood what I saw. But it wasn't a one-time thing." Marcus had documentation, screenshots, emails, a pattern of Morrison and the head hostess, Gabrielle Devereaux, systematically losing reservations from people with names or appearances that didn't fit their vision of Lumiere's clientele. Morrison called it maintaining standards, Marcus revealed. He said our reputation depended on curating the right atmosphere. He never said outright, no Muslims or no Black people. But the implication was clear. If someone sounded ethnic on the phone or showed up in traditional dress, suddenly their reservation would have problems. The screenshots Marcus provided were damning. Email exchanges showing Morrison asking staff to be selective about confirmations. A leaked training document advising hosts on how to politely discourage certain clientele. Internal messages mocking customers' names and appearances. The day the second article dropped, protests outside Lumiere tripled. Civil rights organizations got involved. The New York Attorney General announced an investigation. Several investors withdrew their backing. Yelp was flooded with one-star reviews. Within 48 hours, 3 more former employees came forward with similar stories. Lumiere's carefully crafted image of European elegance and exclusivity crumbled under the weight of evidence. Amira watched it all unfold from her apartment, feeling like she was in the eye of a hurricane. The vindication felt hollow, overshadowed by the reality of what she'd unleashed. Her life had become unmanageable. She'd had to take a leave of absence from the hospital after protesters showed up there, thinking they were being supportive, but actually disrupting patient care. Her parents' apartment had reporters camped outside. Omar had to quit social media entirely after his law school classmates started debating the case in group chats. "I just wanted dinner," she told Sarah one evening, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to celebrate my parents' anniversary. Now I'm the face of anti-Muslim discrimination in America. I have people calling me a hero and people calling me a liar. I have strangers sending me money for legal fees I don't need, and other strangers telling me I should be deported to a country I've never lived in. This isn't what I wanted." "I know," Sarah said softly. "But look at what you've exposed. Look at how many other people have come forward. You've started something important." "Have I? Or have I just provided another week of outrage porn for people to consume before they move on to the next thing?" Sarah didn't have an answer for that. 3 weeks after the story broke, Lumiere closed its doors. The official statement cited economic pressures and the need to reevaluate our business model. But everyone knew the truth. The restaurant couldn't survive the scandal. Morrison was fired. Gabrielle Devereaux resigned. The owners issued a public apology that felt corporate and insincere, written by lawyers worried about liability. Amira should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt exhausted. The closure brought a new wave of attention. News outlets wanted her reaction. Supporters wanted her to celebrate. But all Amira could think about was the servers who'd lost their jobs, the line cooks who'd had nothing to do with Morrison's prejudice, the busboys who were now unemployed because of a battle they hadn't chosen. "You can't blame yourself for that," Marcus told her when they finally met in person, at a quiet park in Queens where no one would recognize them. "Those people lost their jobs because Morrison and the owners created a toxic, discriminatory culture. You just exposed it. But they're still unemployed," Amira protested. "They're still struggling to pay rent, still wondering how to feed their families." "Because of me. Because of Morrison," Marcus corrected firmly. because of a system that allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked. Amira, I've worked in restaurants my whole adult life. Do you know how many times I've seen what happened to you? How many times I participated in it, following orders, keeping my head down? This industry is full of gatekeepers who decide who belongs and who doesn't based on skin color, accent, religion, appearance. Someone had to take a stand. I'm just sorry it took so long. What happens now? Amira asked. Marcus shrugged. The Attorney General's investigation continues. There might be lawsuits. There's talk of new anti-discrimination legislation. But honestly, most of it will probably fade away. People will forget. The news cycle will move on. In 6 months, someone will try to open a new restaurant in that space. And maybe they'll be better, or maybe they'll just be more careful about hiding their prejudices. That's depressing. That's realistic. Marcus smiled sadly. But you know what won't fade? The fact that you stood up. The fact that you didn't accept being treated as less than. That matters. That inspires people. I've gotten messages from servers and hosts all over the city telling me that they're not going to stay quiet anymore when they see discrimination. Students telling me they're studying civil rights law because of this case. That's the real victory, not the restaurant closing, but people waking up. Amira wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that her pain had purpose, that the destruction of her privacy and peace had bought something meaningful. But she'd learned, over these brutal weeks, that justice was messy and incomplete, that victories were rarely clean, that sometimes doing the right thing cost more than anyone should have to pay. The lawsuit. When the letter arrived from Morrison's lawyers 6 weeks after Lumiere's closure, Amira wasn't surprised. She'd been expecting retaliation in some form, a defamation suit, harassment charges, something to punish her for speaking up. What surprised her was the amount. $3 million in damages for defamatory statements that destroyed his reputation and career. She sat at her kitchen table, reading the legal filing with shaking hands. According to Morrison's complaint, Amira had orchestrated a malicious campaign against him, using her fabricated story to gain attention and sympathy. He claimed the reservation cancellation had been a genuine technological error, that he'd treated her with nothing but courtesy, and that her accusations had cost him his livelihood, his marriage. His wife had filed for divorce 2 weeks after the scandal broke, and his standing in the community. This is insane, Omar said, reading over her shoulder. He was 2 months into his second semester of law school, and his professors had already used the Lumiere case as an example in 3 different classes. He's claiming you made it all up. There's documentation. There are witnesses. Marcus literally provided screenshots of Morrison deleting your reservation. It doesn't matter if it's true, Amira said numbly. It matters if it's expensive. He knows I can't afford to fight a lawsuit like this. He knows most people settle when they're facing millions in damages they could never pay. This is about silencing me, about making an example of me so the next person thinks twice before speaking up. Omar slammed his hand on the table. This is exactly why people don't report discrimination. Because the system punishes victims and protects perpetrators. Sarah, who'd been listening from the doorway, pulled out her phone. We need a lawyer. A good one. I can't afford. You won't have to, Sarah interrupted. This case is exactly the kind of thing civil rights organizations live for. Plus, with all the publicity, plenty of lawyers would take this pro bono just for the exposure. She was right. Within 24 hours of the lawsuit becoming public, Amira had been contacted by 7 different law firms offering representation. She chose Jennifer Washington, a civil rights attorney who'd successfully argued 3 discrimination cases before the Supreme Court and who met with Amira personally instead of sending an associate. Morrison is desperate, Jennifer explained at their first meeting. Lumiere closing destroyed his reputation in the restaurant industry. No one will hire him. He's become a symbol of discrimination, and he knows it. This lawsuit is a Hail Mary attempt to rewrite the narrative. If he can paint you as a liar, maybe he can resurrect his career. Can he win? Amir asked. Jennifer's expression was serious. In a just world? No. You have documentation, witnesses, a pattern of behavior corroborated by multiple sources. But we don't live in a just world. Juries are unpredictable. Judges have biases. Sometimes the truth isn't enough. So what do? We fight. We present every piece of evidence. We put Marcus on the stand. We show the pattern of discrimination. and we countersue for the emotional distress his actions caused you, for the violation of your civil rights, for the hostile environment he created. The legal battle consumed the next 8 months of Amira's life. Depositions, document reviews, strategy sessions. She had to relive that night at Lumiere's door over and over, answer invasive questions about her mental health, her motivations, her character. Morrison's lawyers tried to paint her as an attention seeker, someone who'd manufactured a discrimination claim for fame and money. Isn't it true? Morrison's lead attorney, a shark-eyed man named Richard Keller, asked during her deposition, that you posted about this incident on social media before even attempting to resolve it privately with the restaurant. I posted about my experience, yes. Amira replied carefully, Jennifer's coaching echoing in her mind. After being threatened with police and told to leave. But you didn't file a formal complaint with management, did you? The manager was the one threatening me. So you went straight to social media to publicly shame the restaurant? I shared my experience. I didn't realize that speaking the truth was shameful. Keller's expression tightened. Isn't it true that you've given multiple paid interviews about this incident? I've given interviews, yes. Some outlets offered payment, which I donated to civil rights organizations. How convenient. And these interviews, they all portrayed you as a victim, didn't they? A narrative that's been quite profitable for you in terms of public sympathy and attention. Jennifer objected, but the damage was done. Keller was building a narrative of his own, that Amira was a calculated opportunist who'd seen a chance for fame and seized it. Facts be damned. The worst part was the public nature of it all. Every filing became a news story. Legal analysts on cable news debated the case's merits. Social media split into camps, #stand with Amira versus #justice for Morrison. The latter was smaller but viciously dedicated, digging into every aspect of Amira's life, finding old social media posts to take out of context, creating conspiracy theories about her motivations. Someone found a photo from her college years of her at a protest against Islamophobia and used it as proof she had a history of playing the victim card. Someone else dug up a negative Yelp review she'd written 3 years ago about a different restaurant and claimed it showed a pattern of trying to destroy businesses. The harassment got so bad that she had to move apartments twice. Through it all, her parents remained steadfast. Her father, who'd been quietly furious since the night of the incident, attended every court date, sitting in the front row with her mother, their presence a silent declaration of support. Omar put his law studies to use, helping Jennifer's team with research, bringing an energy and passion to the case that sometimes flagged in the older attorneys. The case finally went to trial in June, almost a year after that fateful October evening. The courthouse steps were packed with protesters on both sides. Media trucks lined the street. Amira walked through the gauntlet with Jennifer's hand on her elbow, ignoring the shouted questions, the camera flashes, the hatred and support screamed in equal measure. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Morrison took the stand, composed and regretful, insisting he'd simply been trying to run a quality establishment, that the reservation cancellation had been an honest technological error, that he'd never discriminated against anyone in his life. Keller called character witnesses, other restaurant owners, longtime customers, staff members who testified to Morrison's professionalism. Then Jennifer put Marcus on the stand. Mr. Chen, she said, can you explain to the jury what you witnessed on September 1st of last year? Marcus looked directly at Morrison as he spoke. I watched David Morrison intentionally delete Amira Hassan's reservation from our system. He pulled up her booking, which I had entered and confirmed, and removed it. Then he told the hostess to claim there was no reservation if anyone named Hassan arrived. And did you ask him why he did this? I did, he said. Marcus paused, taking a breath. He said, we need to be careful about who we let through the door. Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere, and hijabs don't exactly scream sophistication. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Morrison's face went pale, then red. Keller jumped up, objecting, demanding to know why this alleged statement hadn't been mentioned earlier. It was, Jennifer said calmly, holding up one of Marcus's original statements. On page 4 of Mr. Chen's sworn affidavit, provided during discovery. Perhaps Mr. Keller needs time to review his files? The trial turned on that moment. Over the next week, Jennifer systematically dismantled Morrison's defense. She presented the screenshots Marcus had preserved. She called the other families who'd experienced discrimination. She brought in a technology expert who testified that the system upgrade Morrison had blamed couldn't have caused the deletion. It would have either transferred all reservations or none. not selectively removed specific ones. Most powerfully, she called Amira herself. Miss Hassan, Jennifer said gently. Can you describe for the jury how you felt that night standing at Lamir's entrance? Amira took a moment, gathering her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was steady but her hands gripped the witness stand. I felt like I'd been punched. All my life, I've worked to prove I belong here. I was born in Brooklyn. I went to public school, then nursing school. I save lives, literally. That's my job. I pay taxes. I vote. I do everything I'm supposed to do as an American citizen. And that night, standing there with my confirmation email in my hand, being told I was lying, being threatened with police for the crime of existing while Muslim, I felt like none of it mattered. Like I would always be seen as other, as suspect, as someone who needed to be kept out. And when Mr. Morrison suggested you try another restaurant, what went through your mind? I thought about all the other restaurants, all the other doors that have been closed to people like me throughout history. I thought about no Irish need apply signs, about whites only water fountains, about all the ways America has told certain people they don't belong while simultaneously claiming to be a land of opportunity for all. I thought about whether anything had really changed, or if we'd just gotten better at hiding our prejudices behind polite excuses. She looked at Morrison then, meeting his eyes directly. And I thought, not this time. This time, I'm not going to accept it quietly. This time, I'm going to speak up, even if it costs me everything, because maybe if I do, the next person won't have to. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the forewoman, a middle-aged black woman who'd listened intently throughout the trial, read the verdict with clear, strong voice. On the count of defamation against Amira Hassan, we find in favor of the defendant. On the countersuit for violation of civil rights, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Amira Hassan, and award damages in the amount of $2.5 million. The courtroom exploded again, but this time Amira barely heard it. She felt Jennifer's arm around her shoulders, heard her parents crying behind her, saw Omar pump his fist in the air. But mostly, she felt something loosen in her chest, a weight she'd been carrying for a year finally lifting. Justice. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. Ripples. The verdict sent shockwaves through the restaurant industry. Within weeks, 3 major restaurant groups announced new diversity and inclusion training programs. The New York City Council fast-tracked legislation requiring restaurants to maintain transparent records of reservation cancellations. The state attorney general's office expanded its investigation into discrimination in the hospitality sector, resulting in settlements with 4 other establishments. But the most significant changes were quieter, more personal. Amira received hundreds of letters from people who'd experienced similar discrimination, not just in restaurants, but in hotels, clubs, stores, schools, workplaces. Each one told a story of being turned away, turned down, turned into something less than human by the everyday prejudices of American life. She answered every single one. I don't know what to do with all this, she confessed to Sarah one evening, surrounded by stacks of letters. People are treating me like some kind of hero, like I had a choice in any of this. But I was just trying to survive. I'm still just trying to survive. Maybe that's what heroism looks like now, Sarah suggested. Not grand gestures, but ordinary people refusing to accept injustice. You didn't ask for this platform, but you have it now. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Amira thought about that question a lot over the following months. The settlement money, after lawyers' fees and taxes, left her with enough to pay off her student loans and set up a fund for Omar's education. But it also gave her options, freedom to choose her next steps instead of being driven by financial necessity. She could have returned to nursing, to the comfortable anonymity of her old life. The hospital had held her position, eager to welcome back their suddenly famous employee. But something had changed in Amira. She couldn't unsee what she'd seen, couldn't unknow what she'd learned about the systems of discrimination that operated in plain sight, protected by plausible deniability and public apathy. I want to start a foundation, she told her parents over dinner one Friday evening, to help people who experience discrimination but can't afford to fight back, to connect them with lawyers, to cover their costs, to make sure they don't have to choose between justice and survival. Her father smiled, the pride in his eyes unmistakable. Your grandfather, my father, he was a lawyer in Egypt. He spent his career defending people who couldn't defend themselves. He would have loved this. He would have loved you, her mother corrected. We love you. We're so proud of what you've done. of who you've become. The Hassan Foundation for Civil Rights officially launched in March, 18 months after that October evening that had changed everything. The kickoff event was held at a community center in Brooklyn, deliberately chosen instead of some Manhattan ballroom. Amira wanted this to be about the communities who needed it most, not about impressing donors or courting publicity. But publicity came anyway. The story of the Muslim nurse who'd fought back, and one had captured people's imagination. Donations poured in. Law firms volunteered their services. Students reached out, wanting to intern. Within 6 months, the foundation had handled 37 cases, winning settlements or favorable outcomes in 29 of them. One of those cases involved Marcus Chen. After his testimony, Marcus had been blacklisted in the high-end restaurant industry. No one would hire him, fearing he'd be a liability, a potential whistleblower who couldn't be trusted to keep management secrets. He'd been working delivery jobs, barely making rent, when he reached out to Amira's foundation. "I did the right thing," he told her when they met to discuss his case. "But the right thing destroyed my career. I can't get a job in the industry I've worked in my entire adult life. How is that justice?" The foundation helped Marcus sue the 3 restaurant groups that had rescinded job offers after learning about his testimony. They won 2 of the 3 cases, establishing legal precedent that retaliation against whistleblowers in discrimination cases was itself a form of discrimination. The settlements gave Marcus enough to start his own consulting business, helping restaurants develop genuine diversity and inclusion practices. "You saved my life," he told Amira when the final settlement came through. "Not just financially, but you gave me purpose again. You showed me that doing the right thing doesn't have to mean sacrificing everything." "You saved mine first," Amira replied. "If you hadn't come forward, if you hadn't preserved that evidence, Morrison might have won. I'd be the one paying millions in damages right now. We saved each other." The foundation's success brought new challenges. Amira found herself constantly in demand, speaking at conferences, consulting with legislators, appearing on panels about discrimination and civil rights. It was exhausting but also exhilarating, feeling like she was part of something larger than herself, something that might actually create change. But she also learned the limits of individual action. For every case the foundation won, there were dozens they had to turn away due to lack of resources or legal standing. For every restaurant that reformed its practices, there were hundreds that continued discriminating, just more carefully. The systems that had allowed Morrison to operate unchecked for years remained largely intact. "You can't save everyone," Jennifer told her when Amira expressed frustration at these limitations. "You can't fix every injustice. What you can do is create examples, establish precedents, show people it's possible to fight back and win. The rest, the systemic change, that takes generations." "I don't have generations," Amira protested. "People are being discriminated against right now today." "I know. But that's why you train others, why you share what you've learned, why you build institutions that will outlast any individual effort. You're not just fighting cases, Amira. You're building a movement." A movement. The word felt too grand, too presumptuous. But as Amira looked around at the team she'd assembled, lawyers and advocates and activists and regular people who'd experienced discrimination and decided to fight back, she realized Jennifer might be right. What had started as one woman being turned away from a restaurant had evolved into something larger, something that connected individual experiences of injustice into a collective demand for change. Full circle. 2 years after that October evening, Amira found herself back on Fifth Avenue, standing in front of the building that had once housed Lumiere. The restaurant was long gone, replaced by a trendy fusion place called Meridian that had opened with extensive fanfare about its commitment to inclusivity and accessibility. The owner, a Korean-American chef named David Park, had reached out to Amira personally before opening, asking her to consult on their policies. They'd spent hours going over reservation systems, staff training, complaint procedures, all the mechanisms that could prevent or perpetuate discrimination. "I want to do this right," Park had told her earnestly. "Not just because it's good business, though it is, but because it's the right thing to do. What happened to you at Lumiere? That can't happen here. I won't let it." Now, standing outside Meridian, Amira had been invited to a special dinner, an anniversary celebration of sorts, though not the one she'd originally planned. Park had offered her a table for her family, free of charge, as a gesture of apology for what had happened in this space, even though he bore no personal responsibility for Morrison's actions. "You don't have to do this," Sarah had said when Amira mentioned the invitation. If it's too painful, if it brings back bad memories. It does, Amira admitted. But maybe that's why I should do it. To prove that space doesn't belong to Morrison anymore, doesn't belong to that night. To reclaim it. So here she was, with her parents, Omar, Sarah, and Marcus, the family she'd been born with, and the family she'd found through adversity. They walked through Meridian's doors together, and Amira felt her heart rate spike, muscle memory preparing for rejection, for hostility, for that horrible feeling of being unwelcome in a place that should serve everyone. But the hostess, a young Latina woman with a warm smile, greeted them immediately. You must be Ems Hassan. We're so honored to have you. Right this way, please. She led them to a table by the window, a prime spot with a view of the avenue glittering in the evening light. Park himself came out to greet them, shaking everyone's hands, making sure they were comfortable. Thank you for giving us a chance, he said to Amira. I know it might seem strange being back in this space, but I wanted you to see that it's different now, that we learned from what happened, that your fight mattered. Dinner was excellent, innovative, delicious, served with genuine warmth by a diverse staff who seemed happy to be there. Amira watched her parents relax, saw her mother smile as she tried dishes she'd never encountered before, saw her father laugh at one of Omar's terrible jokes. This was what that original anniversary dinner should have been: celebration, joy, family. Are you okay? Sarah asked quietly, noticing tears in Amira's eyes. Yeah, Amira said, wiping them away. I think I am. It's just, we're actually here. We're actually having this dinner. It happened. It happened, Sarah confirmed. 2 years late, in a different restaurant, with battle scars we didn't ask for. But it happened. After dinner, Park presented them with a small plaque that he'd installed near the entrance. It read, in memory of all who have been denied service, turned away, or made to feel unwelcome. Meridian stands as a space for everyone. No exceptions. I was going to add your name, Park explained, but I thought that might be too much. This isn't about memorializing what happened to you specifically. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Amira stared at the plaque, feeling the weight of those words. No exceptions. Such a simple phrase, but one that required constant vigilance, constant commitment, constant willingness to examine and re-examine practices and prejudices. Thank you, she told Park. This means more than you know. Walking home that evening, arm in arm with Sarah while her family chatted ahead of them, Amira felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years: peace. Not the peace of forgetting, or of pretending the trauma hadn't happened, but the peace of having fought and survived and created something meaningful from the pain. Her phone buzzed. Another request for the foundation. A Sikh man denied service at a bar. A transgender woman refused a hotel room. The work never ended. The discrimination never stopped. But now there were mechanisms to fight back, precedents to cite, people who'd learned they didn't have to accept injustice silently. You changed things, Sarah said, as if reading her thoughts. Maybe not everything, maybe not enough, but things that needed changing. We changed things, Amira corrected. I couldn't have done any of this alone. True, but you started it. You stood at that door and refused to walk away quietly. That took courage. Amira thought about courage, about the difference between the courage she'd imagined as a child, all heroic gestures and dramatic moments, and the courage she'd actually needed, the courage to be embarrassed, to be doubted, to be attacked, to keep fighting when giving up would have been so much easier. I'm still scared sometimes, she admitted. Scared that nothing really changes. Scared that in 5 years, or 10 years, some other girl will be turned away from some other restaurant, and we'll all be outraged for a week and then forget about it. Scared that my fight only mattered because it went viral, because I had the right combination of sympathetic factors and media appeal. What about all the people whose discrimination doesn't make headlines? That's why you built the foundation, Sarah pointed out. To help those people. You can't fix every injustice, Amira, but you can make sure that fighting back is accessible to more than just the lucky few whose stories capture public attention. They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the city washing over them, sirens and laughter, music from open windows, the rumble of the subway beneath their feet. New York in all its chaotic, diverse, beautiful, flawed glory. Do you regret it? Sarah asked finally. Hosting that night, speaking up, everything that came after? Amira considered the question seriously. She thought about the death threats, the invasion of privacy, the stress that had turned her hair gray at 26. She thought about the relationships that had fractured under the pressure, the job she'd left, the simple anonymity she'd never get back. But she also thought about Marcus, employed and empowered. She thought about the families the foundation had helped, the precedents they'd set, the policies that had changed. She thought about the letters from strangers thanking her for giving them courage to speak up about their own experiences. She thought about the young Muslim girls who told her they felt less alone knowing someone had fought back. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. I wish it hadn't been necessary. I wish Morrison had just honored my reservation and I'd had a nice dinner with my family and none of this had happened. But since it did happen, I'm glad I didn't stay silent. I'm glad I fought." The next chapter. 5 years after the incident at Lumiere, Amira stood in front of a congressional committee, testifying in support of the Civil Rights and Commerce Act, legislation that would strengthen protections against discrimination in public accommodations and make it easier for individuals to seek recourse when their rights were violated. 5 years ago, she told the assembled senators and representatives, "I was turned away from a restaurant where I had a confirmed reservation. That experience changed my life in ways I never anticipated. But I didn't come here today to talk about my personal story. I came to talk about the thousands of people who've reached out to the Hassan Foundation with their own stories of discrimination, people who were denied service, turned away, or made to feel unwelcome because of their race, religion, gender identity, disability, or simply because they didn't fit someone's narrow idea of who deserves dignity and respect." She presented data the foundation had collected. Hundreds of documented cases of discrimination in restaurants, hotels, stores, and other public spaces. She shared stories of people who'd been too afraid to fight back, too poor to hire lawyers, too worn down by systemic prejudice to believe anything would change. "The law as it currently exists places an enormous burden on victims of discrimination," she continued. "They must prove intent, which is nearly impossible in an era where discrimination has learned to hide behind neutral-sounding excuses. They must fund their own legal battles, which most people cannot afford. They must withstand intense public scrutiny and often vicious attacks on their character and credibility. We are asking people to sacrifice everything for the mere possibility of justice. That's not a system that works. That's not a system worthy of American values." The Civil Rights and Commerce Act would shift that burden, requiring businesses to prove their actions weren't discriminatory rather than forcing victims to prove they were. It would provide funding for legal aid to help people pursue their cases. It would strengthen penalties and create incentives for businesses to proactively address discrimination rather than waiting for lawsuits. The bill was controversial, of course. Business groups opposed it as government overreach. Conservative commentators called it an attack on free enterprise. The hearings grew heated, with senators on both sides making speeches that had more to do with their next election than with actual policy. But Amira had learned patience. She'd learned that change came slowly, that setbacks were inevitable, that the arc of justice bent toward justice only if people kept bending it. The bill didn't pass that year, or the next year, but pieces of it were incorporated into other legislation. States began adopting similar provisions. The conversation shifted, slowly but perceptibly, toward the idea that discrimination was not just morally wrong but economically and socially corrosive. Meanwhile, the Hassan Foundation grew. What had started as a small operation in a Brooklyn office now had staff in 6 cities, handling hundreds of cases a year. They'd won settlements totaling over $30 million, money that went directly to victims and to funding further advocacy work. Amira herself had become an unlikely public figure, regularly consulted on civil rights issues, serving on boards and committees, speaking at universities and conferences. She'd learned to navigate the media, to translate complex legal and social issues into language ordinary people could understand, to tell stories that moved hearts as well as minds. But she never forgot that original moment, standing at Lumiere's door, confirmation email in hand, being told she didn't belong. That memory kept her grounded, kept her focused on the real people behind the statistics and legal theories. On the actual 25th anniversary of her parents' wedding, 7 years after the original planned celebration, Amira finally threw them the party they deserved. It wasn't at a fancy restaurant. It was in a community center in Brooklyn, with food from a dozen different cultures, music ranging from traditional Arabic songs to American pop, and guests representing the diverse coalition of people who'd come together around the foundation's work. Her mother, wearing a beautiful emerald dress that matched the hijab Amira had worn that fateful night, pulled her aside during the party. "I was thinking about that night," she said softly. "The night we were supposed to go to Lumiere. At the time, I was so disappointed, so hurt for you. I felt like we'd failed somehow, like we hadn't done enough to protect you from the hatred in this world." "Mama, no." "Let me finish," her mother said gently. "I was wrong to feel that way. You didn't need our protection. You needed our support, which we gave you. And you took that awful experience and transformed it into something beautiful and meaningful. You protected others. You made change. You became exactly who we raised you to be: strong, principled, unwilling to accept injustice." Amira hugged her mother tightly, tears streaming down both their faces. "I love you, Mama. I love you too, Habibti. And I'm so proud of you." As the party continued around them, Amira looked at the crowd: lawyers and activists, former clients and new volunteers, friends and family, and strangers who'd become allies in the fight for dignity and justice. This was the real celebration, the real anniversary gift. Not a fancy dinner at an exclusive restaurant, but a community built on the belief that everyone deserved a seat at the table. Her phone buzzed. Another case request. This one from a young woman in Chicago who'd been denied an apartment because of her hijab. Amira read the message, feeling that familiar mix of anger and determination. The work continued. The fight continued. That now she didn't fight alone. She typed a response. "We'll help you. You're not alone. Together, we'll make sure they understand that discrimination has consequences." And she meant it. Every word. Because that night at Lumiere's door hadn't just been about one reservation or one restaurant or even one person's dignity. It had been about a fundamental question. Who deserves to be welcomed? Who deserves to be served? Who deserves to be treated as fully human? The answer, Amira had learned, was everyone. No exceptions. And that was worth fighting for, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Years later, students would study the Hassan v. Morrison case in civil rights classes, analyzing the legal precedents it set and the social movements it catalyzed. But for Amira, it would always be simpler than that. It was the night she learned that silence was complicity, that speaking up was necessary, and that one person standing at a closed door and refusing to walk away could eventually open doors for everyone. The door that wouldn't open had, in the end, opened everything. Teachy end.